Hello everyone, this is FIDE Master Viktor Neustroev. Today we have a very specific topic for today's workshop. We are going to talk about the advanced edge pawn of the king's pawn cover as the object of the attack. So the topic sounds actually an advanced kingside pawn as an object of the attack, exactly like I said. Fine, so very specific topic. However, I'm absolutely sure that many of you know that such pawns, like for example h6 in this position, provides white a hook to do the attack on the enemy king. Okay, so we are doing we are doing a Zoom meeting. Together with Zoom meeting, there is a stream. This stream is published on YouTube and chesslands.com. So if you, for some reason, cannot attend this meeting in Zoom, you can watch it on YouTube. Is there anything you want to share with me before we start our main topic? Okay, I didn't know that. Well, actually, yeah, so it's Daniel Noteboom or Noteboom, how to read it properly. I know it depends on which country he was from and how it's common pronounced in his country. I didn't know that there is a Semislav that he did create anything in Semislav variation. I'm quite familiar with Semislav. I played myself, but I didn't know that there is a variation named by him. Okay, so last few workshops were not as good as I wanted because of I think it was kind of inappropriate behavior of some of our attendees. So please do not interrupt each other, do not interrupt me, and if you want to say something, you'd better write down it in the chat. However, it's still allowed to use microphone. Okay, perfect. So first of all, let's start with the main task. Well, let's discuss. Well, when one of the players decide how to locate his pawns, he actually has to solve a very tough issue. So because a lot depends on the piece's activity. For example, this as a pawn structure, h7, g7, and f7 as a king's pawn cover is considered to be the best, but it's easy to attack such pawns. Like with the bishop, with the queen, that is very common. This is considered also to be quite a strong pawn structure. The pawn on g6 and the pawn on h7 is still fine, but only works when there is a dark squared bishop on g7 covering it. If not, then weaknesses on the dark squares can be crucial. So, for example, changing the pawn structure like that when the pawns are on f7, g7, and g6 is okay. However, there is a risk of an attack with knight g5 and queen h4 and then queen h7. So the attack through the open file, through the open h file. Here, our task is to find how exactly white can take advantage of the pawn being on h6. Looks like it's a solid pawn structure, but not fully. So the h pawn or even the g pawn may have some vulnerabilities. For example, it can be a hook for our pawn march on the king side. It can be an object of a piece strike. For example, when we sacrifice a bishop, for example, on h6, maybe the knight, but in this position we cannot do it. Or it can weaken some squares around the enemy king. We can actually provoke our opponent to play with the h pawn. How? By attacking it, by locating our queen on the h file, by trying to invade with our knight to g5. Or sometimes our opponent makes such a move voluntarily when he wants to create an escape square for the king. And all that can cause vulnerabilities of this position. Okay, so what do you think white should continue in this exact position? Can you... Queen h3? Did you mean the same? So why queen h3? Okay, John suggests queen f3 with g4, g5. Sounds like a plan. I don't know why you guys don't suggest queen h4, because queen h4 looks natural. What don't you like there? Knight d5 or what? Well, queen h3 actually works too. Okay, so queen h4 and knight d5, I want to play queen g3. And if you now play f6, I can play queen g6. Or wait, let me see if it's the best move. Yeah, queen g6. It's poisoned because then I take and then I play queen h7, checkmate. So, yeah, well, okay. Or maybe queen h3 actually. Yeah, looks like a plan. Queen h3, then g4, and so on. So, what else? Any other suggestions? Well, the queen is hanging, so you cannot play rook f3 now. Yeah, queen f3 also looks like a plan, but it seems that the queen should be on the h file. So because if the idea is g4, g5, then having the queen on h file allows us to checkmate on h7. Or if it's not checkmate, at least it's a dangerous attack. Queen f3, queen d5. Here I don't fully agree because I think e4 can be played. Maybe it blocks the bishop. And then it seems that you have to play back, because if I take there and open the king, then black is in trouble. However, you can try queen d8. Okay, and that blocked my bishop, which I didn't want originally. So maybe still g4 and then g5. Why not? So still looks like a winning position with a strong attack. Okay, Alex suggested bishop takes f6. This move was played in the game. It's not better than queen h4 or queen h3, but it's another common way to take advantage of this pawn. Now, well, queen takes for sure, and g4, with the idea of playing g5 at the very next move. There is no trade. Everything like that blunders a pawn. g5 blunders everything. f7 is vulnerable then. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, yeah, we can play rook c7. So queen h3 and rook c7 are the best moves suggested by the engine. So it seems to me that you are not trying to analyze the position, but using the engine at our workshop. What for? Do you want to show that you're better than other attendees or what? I'm very likely to ban you if you keep following the engine suggestions. So, well, so g4 is definitely more a human move than rook c7, but rook c7 works too. How? Rook e7, and they have only one piece into the attack, so you can continue with rook c1. And if they are traded, you're fine. If they try to do something like that, you can then focus to the other side. Switch the place of action to the other side and just capture the b7 pawn. And for example, in this position, after queen c5, well, bishop c6 is impossible. So they have to play that, and then you take there. But g4, in terms of our attack, works perfectly well. So to not get to not lose a tempo, they move the queen in advance. g5 anyway. So why g5 anyway is required? Of course, we can keep playing like that, then this, or maybe rook to g3, maybe, well, I don't know if bishop d3 is a helpful move or not, but what I want you to remember is that look at this position. Look at these pieces. Well, these two are doing something, but these two not. And it tells us that we should attack until our opponent develops all of his pieces. His bishop and his other rook join the place of action. Because once it happens, he's very likely to trade our active pieces, and we may not have sufficient material to finish our attacks successfully. So that's why what we should do. We should play g5 and open the position right away. Okay, I can rewind and we can discuss f5 move. I don't think it's a good move. I don't like it because, well, if you take, it first activates, yeah, what if they take, by the way? You want to take, then bishop takes, rook takes, fine. But are you sure it's a winning position? So let's say queen e6. Now rook c7, but you know, now rook c7 is not enough. You blunder on e3 with a check, and it can be checkmate then. So rook c7 is already too late, because king moves, it's checkmate. You can block, and if you block, you can avoid checkmate, but do you really need it? So king moves, then what? Rook e7, for example. Rook f7, checkmate. So this time rook c7 is no, after f5 rook c7 is too risky. With f5 you also allow them to use their bishop, so this is what you'd better avoid. If now they want to use their bishop, they have to play e5, and this is a pawn sacrifice, and they still do not fully take advantage of their bishop activity. So g4 is the most natural move, or rook c7, but rook c7 is more about a positional play. You don't fully take advantage of the weakness on h6. Is g4 risky or not? Okay, very good question. Thanks, Alex. When a pawn march from your king is risky and when not? Well, if the center is stable or closed, then you can advance your pawns from the king because your opponent is unlikely to take advantage of your king's weakness. Darsh, can you please stop drawing? Thanks. If you want to say something, you'd better write down it in the chat or unmute yourself and pronounce. But here, the center is more or less open. So that can be a problem. But here we see that the white pieces are very close to the king, and if needed, they can defend the king's position. At the same time, black has only the queen into the attack, so it tells us that the queen alone cannot do any harm for the white's position. So that's why, yes, in this exact position, you can play g4. When the center is stable or close, you can still play g4 and advance a pawn march from your king. If, let's say, he has pieces like the knight on e4, maybe the bishop on this diagonal, and then you play g4, you are likely to lose the game, because that weakens the king significantly. In the position when your opponent cannot take advantage of it, it doesn't seem risky. Rook c5 seems also possible. Well, to be honest, I don't see the purpose of this move. If in this position you ask me which move to play, rook c5 or g5, I would definitely answer g5. What does rook c5 do? You want to transfer it to g5. Okay, but then what? To threaten to take the pawn on h6. So everything for just one pawn. I think after you play rook g5, they can play queen f6. So rook c5 in order to double, yes, but it's more like a positional play. Here you definitely have better chances to win if you do the attack rather than occupy the c file. So if, let's say, you didn't have the attack, then rook c5, rook c1, and rook c7 invasion. Okay, so fine. Please mute your microphones if there is any echo or background noise. If needed, we can bring bishop e4 and bishop g2. Okay, yes, good point. You can also support the king with this. What did happen in the game? So it's already too late to do any active actions, because if bishop d7, you take there, well, this, and with queen g5, you pass the game to a winning endgame. They have to trade, and if they have to trade, then their pieces are tied down to this passed pawn. You also can continue with this, with that, putting more pressure. So it's a winning position. What did happen in the game? So black decides to expand space. This strategy typically works. It typically works, but when there are pieces that can join the place of action. So for example, if let's say b5 was played, the rook was on a7, the bishop was somewhere on a better position, like even if the bishop was already on d7, it would work. So for example, let's say I spend the tempo, instead of playing g5, I play this, which move? Well, let's say this move, bishop d7 is played, g5, this is where f5 would already work. So take, queen takes, and looks like the queen here covers critical squares. White still continues with their attack. Rook c7 is possible, but at least black doesn't lose the game immediately. In this position, with pieces being so passive, after g5, f5 loses. How does f5 loses? How would you continue then? En passant, e4 is suggested. What else? John also suggested g takes f6. Rook f3. Well, what's the purpose of rook f3? The purpose is to add pressure. Fine, guys, actually it's easier than you think. Rook f3, let's first discuss it. Rook f3, what is going to happen then? So definitely this or this is a threat. Let's say they try queen f7, because if you close the position, they have a chance to survive. The position becomes closed, there is no way white can open it on the king side, and the white has to focus on the positional play. So g6 definitely not. Trading queens, absolutely not, because then there is no attack. So queen h4, and it can be h5, and on the next move g6. You can try g6 yourself, queen g6, rook here, but then what? So looks like then rook c7. Okay, so yeah, let me let me play more accurate way. Otherwise, rook c7 is a serious problem. So this accurate move helps. So probably b5, rook a7 then. Rook c2. Well, no, okay, let it be rook c2 like you suggest. So what do I have? I have this, and this. And if rook g6, if rook g5, then g6. And rook g6, but the queen sacrifice, not a sacrifice, it's exchange. So what do you get? A pawn? Well, well, white is better, but it's too far from a winning position. Actually, wait a sec. Queen here, this. I want to play g6. Because if queen here, rook g7. Okay, so it's too far to from a winning position. So it seems like a very slow plan then. Well, I don't know, but you guys didn't suggest g takes h6 in this position. Why? Let's just win the pawn. So I think here black wanted to take. So let's say here, well, king f2 is possible, or rook f3 or rook f2. What is better? So rook f3, rook there with an attack. This time this attack looks more promising because the position of the king is more open. But just queen h6 guarantees a winning endgame. However, the best move is this. So they cannot take with a queen because their rook is hanging. They cannot take with a pawn because of, well, here you can do rook f2, rook g2, but the best move was king f2, and then just rook g1. On the f2, the king is better than on h1, for example. And you don't have to do a rook lift with both of your rooks. You just do rook g1, and then that's the end. So, for example, the queen cannot protect this pawn. So what do they have to play? The next move is rook g1. So let's say king f8, but rook g1 anyway. So why rook g1 first? To stop them from protecting. So this is still not playable. How to play? I don't know. Queen f7 to escape, right? But then it's an extra queen, so there is nothing to discuss then. Rook c7, bishop d7. On the other, he blocks it. So rook g7 is better. Well, it's the same. I think rook c7, well, it's a helpful move, of course, but it's not required. So just bishop g6 in this position to get maximum advantage. So just g takes f6, the position is totally ruined. And after g takes f6, black resigned. Let's see what we did. I think that white actually chose probably the simplest way. It wasn't objectively the best way, but the simplest way to realize advantage. Take on f6, queen takes, and then g4, threatening with g5, which is a forcing move already. So that's why such a strategy, such a plan that white initiated didn't provide black with anything to save the game. So they just didn't have a chance. Maybe queen h3 and queen h4 or queen f3, g4, g5 would lead to more advantage for white. But if you see that you can win the game simply, do you really need to analyze other lines? It seems not. Okay, so Vivek suggests, what if we try rook g5 to go after the h pawn after queen f7? Oh, well, sorry, I don't. You probably mean rook g6, not rook g5. I don't know. Or maybe rook c5, rook g5, this maneuver. Well, we've already discussed it. Fine, so let's continue. Look at this position and think of what do you think white should do in this position. Black castled to the queen side, white castled to the king side. On the first glance, it seems that the position of the black king is more solid. But maybe these pawns can be already hooks for your attack. So, but which move to start with? What do you think? And while you are thinking, let me tell you how to defend. Well, when your opponent attacks you, how to defend your position. You can evacuate the king. You can protect weak squares with your pieces. You can try to exchange enemy pieces, the ones that participate in the attack. Or you can keep your pawn flexible, so once your opponent advances them, you can advance the pawn that he offers for a trade, and this is how you can block the pawn structure. That is probably the best way. Anyway, in this game between Jose Raul Capablanca and David Janovsky, white still won. Black didn't have a single chance to save. Okay, here we will suggest to start with knight d2. Knight d2, not allowing this trade. Why? I don't think this is a promising trade. Knight a4. Okay, knight a4 is interesting, but the idea of knight a4, I think, is not to move the knight, but to control the b4 square with the queen. Oh, John has a completely opposite idea. Instead of doing queenside activity, queen g3 and knight h4. I didn't think about it. Well, actually, guys, what you should understand that even if you take the pawn on g7, it seems to be too risky. If they lose a knight, that's fine for you. But if you win only pawn, there can be a counterattack through the g file. So let's discuss queen g3, of course. Knight a4 is also a candidate move, actually. So let's say this move. They continue with f6, aiming for g5, then h5 somehow. Because with this move, you attack the pawn. If you play h3 in this position, e5 you're black, I would play bishop e6. Then knight here and the pawn there. And it still seems for me quite promising for black. What does the engine say? Okay, the engine says it's already minus 0.7 here. So queen g3 plan doesn't work. Let's try this move. So g5, knight f5. Bishop takes, knight takes. Oh, pawn takes. Well, this is still a plan. That's why I don't think it's so promising for white. Maybe white... what else, actually? After knight f5, it's possible to play queen f8, which is a bit unclear. Okay, so... Well, it's definitely not what I want you to do. When you have opposite side castling positions, it's quite important to attack the enemy king faster than they can attack your king. Let's talk about this move. So the idea of this move is to play b4, because b4 now is supported by the queen. Well, and it looks reasonable. How they should play? Well, let's say they just continue with f6. You do b4 and they play b6. So if you want to proceed with the... Oh, really? I didn't realize it. So let's say f6, queen a5. I didn't think about queen a5. So king b8, then you want to do b4, right? So bishop c8, and I threatened to trap the queen. So maybe queen moving to a5 was too early for such an attack. Well, let's stick knight c5 in which position? In that line with the queen there, knight c5. Yeah, I'm a little worried about b6 because I don't think you can take. I play king a7 and then you have two pieces hanging. So probably here you have to bring it back, and then we should decide whether black can allow themselves to take or it's too risky. So queen b4 is a mating threat, but I don't know. So I think rook b8 and so, and then how? Bringing the knight there is a plan. So how do you do it? Well, it's promising, but it requires calculation. Maybe I don't have to play. Maybe I don't have to play b6 in this position because at the moment there is no threat. Like knight a6 is not a threat. Knight b7 is not a threat. So can I just do something like that and try to advance the h pawn, threatening there? So you sacrifice with knight d2. You sacrifice on e3, but then you can also sacrifice on c2, or you want to play this move. Okay, yes, but well, we have to also to consider the black's moves too. A4. So this time b6 seems to be better because queen a3. Okay. The a pawn with a knight, no. Then bishop a6. The queen is hanging. You cannot play discovery check because of that. So you have to. Sorry, didn't get it. Can you please explain it? We take king a7, then what? Which check? Well, no, your queen is hanging. You cannot do this. So knight a6, king a7, and your queen is hanging. So moving the queen means that the knight is lost and the king is covered with the bishop. So you can try tons of discovered attacks, but after you lose your queen, you should resign. Okay, fine. So no. Taking doesn't work, but queen a3 is still risky for black, I mean. So take, king a7, rook b1. The knight doesn't come to c4, so maybe that's why it seems to be promising for black this time. Okay, so let's still do this. So bishop a8, and once knight e5 is played, rook b8. So yeah, the problem of these sacrifices is that if black can defend the position, then they win the game. So that's why they should be very well calculated. Rook b3. So with rook b3, you want to block. I thought that maybe rook b4, but rook b4, queen c5. Okay, can they do the same strategy? So c4. No, c4 can be played here. So, and you don't have queen c5 here. No, you don't. Maybe the rook takes, then you want to take with a pawn. And so what? Okay, let's say I play f5. This is the plan, right? But you cannot play rook a1. It's knight c2. I take. Yes, but checkmate. So g3. Well, queen a2. What if I take? There is a rook. So, and then the rook f8, so there will be some problem here. So even if you do g3, it seems like rook d8, let's say. I want to trade just. Because after such a trade, I can invade the enemy camp. This bishop is, of course, a really bad bishop, but if we can trade queens, then white has no single chance to survive. So, yeah, these sacrifices should be very well calculated before you do them. For example, in this position, capturing there looks still promising for white because of these ideas. But if we make a few other moves and this knight goes to the place of action and the queen can come to g5, then it already seems that capture on c5 is relatively safe for black. So, well, that's why I suggest to analyze b4 instead of bringing the queen to a5 first. But you also need to use the a pawn. So if you do b4, they're gonna do b6, and now in order to use the a pawn, you have to bring the knight back, so you lose another tempo. And that's why the strategy that white applied in this position for me seems more natural. Instead of making the knight move, because they are not sure where the knight is required, they play just rook b1. Yes, but Brian, yes, a3 is definitely helpful in order to play b4, but you need a4 after that. And if you need a4, then a3 is a tempo loss. So having the rook on the b file is better than just losing the tempo. No, otherwise, if you didn't have this move, if you didn't have queen b1, for example, then yes, a3. Sometimes we have to play so. So f6, b4. Well, could it make sense to play something like that or like this? No. Why? Because then a3 and b4. So white could offer a pawn trade earlier than black could expect it. Okay, so John thought about the sacrifice of the pawn. John, I thought it's too risky. Doing before right away was when then queen before, then I'm not sure that you have a sufficient attack there. So actually, let's just take a very quick look at this position. So what's going on? If queen before, it's 95. So maybe bishop f3, rook f3, and then queen b4. Rook b1, and well, black seems to be okay with the queen on c5. There is knight a4, but it cannot be played right away. So maybe rook f2. No, not rook f2. Rook f2, knight g4. So maybe, well, okay, let it be rook f2. No, still knight g4. Okay. Queen d2. Okay, let it be queen d2. I even wonder, what about this move? a4 can be ignored. So black doesn't attack on the king side, but he doesn't really need it because he already has extra pawn, and just a simple conversion or trading pieces would help. You said d4 e what, can you So which pawn I'm going to take? Well, I think with the a, I would open the a file. I would open the a file, and then at some case, okay, I would evacuate the king there. Or the other strategy, okay, let me play f6, so take. So let's say you want to go that way, king b7, and I'm going to trade rooks. So there will be no way to invade. In order to open the position, you will have to play c4, but c4 is hard because you need to move the knight to a better position and then play c4. And even if you do c4, I'm very likely to already trade some material. Okay, so, but taking with the c pawn, I don't it isn't good because a6 is a weakness and the knight goes to d5. So that's the main reason why I don't like this. So I would take with the a. But what about this move just? Because knight where e2, a5, this move weakens this pawn. Oh, yes, but does it change a situation drastically? Because yes, in that case, when you bring the rook back to the a file, still king b7 is playable, and in order to invade, you have to double, which requires tempi and still allows black to bring the rook to a8. And in this position, I think that maybe this is a good move already. So how to defend? Capturing definitely leads to unpromising endgame. Capturing on b4, then rook takes d3. So fine. Where we are here, pushing the pawn, the d pawn push. But take, then take there. So take, let's say, oops, knight takes, pawn takes. Queen b2 isn't checkmate, so you lose a knight then. So e takes, queen takes, it's over. Okay, fine. So b4 seems risky. Rook b1 was played. c5 or a5 is risky too. f6, b4 finally was played. In order to advance the h pawn, they have to bring the knight somewhere else. a4, now they decided to trade to speed up the pawn march. But before doing it, black decides to keep their pawns more flexible. So they play b6 move. Now, once b5 is played, what do you think black wanted to do? Why did they play so? Right away? Wait, well, your c6 pawn is hanging. You cannot play e5 right away. Oh, that's right. So this is exactly what they did, because it still looks solid. And, well, this file is partially open, but still there is a pawn which is very hard to get rid of. Now, in order to take it, they have to sacrifice. So, yes, absolutely right. Well, this is what I'm saying, a flexible pawn structure. So making b6 is very helpful because it allows you to achieve the pawn structure that you need to block and to avoid exchanges. So, for example, if you didn't do it, but let's say you play g5, which is also a logical move, then b5. Now, for example, doing like that would already mean that white pushes b6 and there is no way to get the pawns connected, and the a5 pawn itself becomes a weakness. So taking there means more open files to the position. So queen a5 allows to do a very strong attack. b6, b5, take, and a5 after that. However, the game continues. What do you think? What is the white's plan then? If white still wants to succeed with their attack, if white still wants to open files to bring the rooks, because without rooks it's impossible to deliver checkmate. So like that. If they take, but they may not, because they actually want you to take it so that they can bring the knight. So knight d5 is a logical move, it's a tempo move, but if you want to open the position of the king and still trade some of the pawns. So Tyler, You suggested knight d5, but let's say queen moves to c5 or d6. How do you continue then? So knight d5, queen c5. Rook b3. What's the purpose of rook b3? Oh, c3. And to be able to play d4? Okay, so I think Tyler has a better suggestion. So it's c4. Then you're gonna prepare d4 and you can play c5. So the idea is not to connect the rooks, but to advance the pawn to c5 to initiate this trade. Because even if you can bring the rook, but you cannot change the pawn structure and the king is still covered, the only thing you can hope for is a tactical strike. For example, you sacrifice a knight or you sacrifice the rook and it somehow works. But such situation may not occur. He may see that you're going to sacrifice a piece and do some preparation for that. But it's hard to do any preparations versus this plan. So c4, knight g5 with a temper, rook f2, and the knight goes to e6. Also some preparation to stop this move. How to continue? It looks like they stop us from playing d4, but it seems that only for a while. Rook d1. But queen c3 first and then rook d1. And now they cannot stop us from playing this move. And this is the position where only white plays for a win, because black stuck with their attack. They cannot progress. Their queen is already on a different position. So, and moving the g pawn means losing the critical pawn on f6. So that's why here it can be a draw if white doesn't succeed with their attack, or if white succeeds, then it's a winning game. That black may win only if white somehow blunders seriously. King b7 was played, and now, of course, d4. So improving the pawn structure didn't look favorable for black, so they played queen d6. c5 cannot be played. It's a pawn sacrifice, but if it is prepared, then it's fine. Now they did take to open the position a little more and continued with knight f4 to trade. Well, even if they played rook e8, something like that, still c5 would be played. So c5, and they would have to sacrifice a knight. After rook e4 and rook dc1, looks like white doesn't have many pawns, but it's still a winning position. The c7 pawn dies and should be winning. The game continued with knight f4, c5 was played, and after that there is not much we can talk about. So knight d5, you can already push c6, or you'd better take. Why you'd better take? Because you are still attacking the queen and you are threatening to push the pawn to c6. So after queen d5, it's just c6 and there is not much to talk. They played a few more moves. I actually don't understand why. So for me, a position without a rook, so this position, this is where I would resign if I were playing with black pieces. Well, if my opponent had like 30 seconds on the clock, then maybe we kept playing, but we would keep playing. But well, if he has enough time, then it's time to resign. Anyway, so the key idea of white's attack was to exchange the pawns from the enemy king's pawn cover. How did it go? Rook b1, b4, a4 with the idea of b5. Black did a natural approach. They played b6 to keep pawns flexible. Now it seems that their pawn structure is solid, but there is still a possibility to open the position with such move like c5. And because of this idea, that became the white's next plan. They tried to do everything to push the pawn. It was blocked. Now, in order to get rid of this queen, they have to play d4. And that's why they prepare it with their queen and rook. And after that, it's winning. d4 and c5 simply. Okay, let's continue. This position, what do we have? The pawn on h3 stops us from playing knight g4, for example. But, and it's an extra pawn, by the way. However, this pawn is at the same time the object of the attack. Black to move. The g3 square is weak, by the way, so it's weakened. How would you continue for black in this position? So rook g8 is a suggestion. Rook d to h8. So two moves. What else? So this. Yeah, looks like these are the most logical line. Okay, so Brian, what idea did you have in mind when you suggested this move? But is it checkmate? Knight g4, pawn takes, rook h1, king f2, bishop f4, g3, rook h2, you win a queen. Okay, okay, yeah, it seems promising. Maybe you also lose a rook there. So it can be a lot of material. But yeah, okay, knight g4. What does knight g4 allow you to do? Let's say, okay, b4. B4 logical move. So knight g4 now, what does it? Well, then the bishop h8 can be played. With knight g4, you don't checkmate. What do you think? After bishop h8, rook h8, so, well, then the knight becomes hanging. So, no. Wait, you, before playing knight g4, you have to play rook h7, but it all seems to be too slow. Okay, let's say this, and then finally you do so. What do you achieve with such a strategy? To not to take this knight? Yes, I don't want to take this knight. How do I want to play then? Let's decide. Well, I want to play this move. Because if I sacrifice there, then maybe I can take the knight. No, I'm not sure actually, but I think that the rook on the open file will definitely do me a favor. e5, knight d5. But it's protected. Yeah, but okay. Rook c6. Can I play queen f3? Well, I'm losing this pawn, but maybe it's still enough. Well, you could play queen c5 right. In case of queen f3, yes. Yeah, if you want to play queen c5, you'd better play it right away. But queen c5 here, let's say what? Bishop d4. So queen c6 now. Okay, now this move. There is no e5, I think. because of h takes g4. Yeah, well, seems to be sufficient. So, I mean, rook h8, rook h7 consist of many tempi, and knight g4 isn't such a big threat. That's why rook g8 seems like a more logical move, because with this move you threaten to take on h3 if you can get rid of the knight. And you can get rid of the knight. For example, well, they cannot escape with their king, this is clear, but if they try like that move, then with knight g6, you trade the knight and then you can take. If the knight escapes right away, I even think rook h3 already works. So pawn takes, knight f4, discovery check, you take the queen. So that's why rook g8 seems more natural move. And white decided to trade this knight in the center to stop knight g6 and maybe knight g4 also. Queen takes e5, knight f3 with a tempo, the queen goes back. So all pieces except this bishop are trying to attack the king side. How to play? Well, the game continued with this move, and I don't really like it. What do you think black continued then? What's the purpose of bishop g5? Do you want to trade your bishop for the knight on f4? Okay, yes, you can. And the goal to take this knight on f4 is to win a pawn on h3, right? Yeah, so why bishop g5 and bishop f4 if there is a simple move e5? And then once the knight moves, you can take on h3. This is exactly what happened in the game. But let's decide. So they played rook a d1. So maybe it was already a mistake. What about king h1 move? Because king h1 is a typical solution. Now the pawn is not pinned, and after rook h3, g takes h3 is played, in case if e5 is still continued. So what do you think? If king h1 was played, how would black continue then? Queen g3. Okay, queen g3, queen f2. Can I trade pieces? So queen g3 looks premature. After queen f2, what? The queen has to go back because I don't see immediate win then. And if there is no immediate win, then trading queens is definitely unfavorable. Yeah, still e5 works, but this time for e5, no, it still works actually. Knight d5 and you cannot take. John suggested bishop f6 and Tyler suggested bishop d6. I like bishop d6 more because then you threaten to take. Okay, Tyler, may I know your chess.com rating or if you have USCF rating? Any? So bishop d6 threatening to take there and then threatening with queen g3. It works. I can show you how. For example, rook a d1, bishop f4, pawn takes f4, and then you can continue with queen g3. You can... Yeah, I think with queen... No, you can play take on h3 already, right? So queen g3 works too, but you can already take because then queen g3 works. So how queen g3 works in this case? It allows you to take on h3 and that's it. And the knight is useless because it's pinned. So for example, queen h2, take, and it's checkmate. Rook d3 to protect there, take there, and this rook is hanging. So now this means we can take there. So absolutely losing position. And rook h3 already works. Or you can try queen g3 first and rook h3 on the next move. So well, not e5 because they block your bishop, but bishop d6 and bishop f4 and then taking on h3, or queen g3 and then taking on h3. So probably against bishop d6 they played rook ad1. E5, knight d5, take on h3. This is what happened in the game. Here they played queen d2. I actually don't know why, but it was hard to make a good move. How would you progress in this position? The queen is tied down to the pawn. Queen h6. Take and queen h6. Yeah, you definitely have to take because, well, the knight is threatening a bishop here, and then queen h6. But queen h6 is not a mating threat. No, it is a mating threat actually. Rook h1, king f2, and then rook g2. No, it's not mate. Yes, it's. Or is it? Yeah, well, rook g2 seems to work. Rook g8 is better, maybe. Maybe. There is a better solution. So when you do the attack, well, that was correct, but when you do the attack, you don't have to obligatory checkmate. Remember that the task of the attack is to convert this attack into a different form of advantage. For example, extra material. Passing the game to a winning endgame will definitely favor you a lot. So e4, and the knight doesn't have a square to move. Knight, well, this all is attacked. Knight h2 means queen g3, and then the knight has no place. Knight e1 as the only logical move fails too, because you can play queen g3 and checkmate quickly. So wait a sec, queen g3 or bishop d6, what is better? No, I think, queen h6 is better, right? Queen h6 is better, then queen h4, and then rook h1. This is how you can checkmate. So for example, rook f4, this, now bishop checks. If g3, bishop takes g3. If the king tries to escape, then it's queen h5. No, rook g2 and then queen h5. Because if you play queen h5 right away, they can block it, then you have to take with the rook. It's still winning, but you'd better get rid of this pawn right away and then play queen h5. This is checkmate. Oh, well, they block, you take. So that's why the game continued with d6, but after this move, we are threatening with mate. So they have to take. We take, they take there. But after queen takes, what white is threatening. So d7 is protected. It's extra rook on the board. Queen e3, there will be a queen straight on the next move. So this is where white resigned. Again, so this extra pawn on h3 was the object of the attack. We blocked, we pinned the g2 pawn in order to take on h3. But to succeed with it, we also were required to get rid of this knight, which is possible either by doing this trade or by just pushing the pawn to e5, or by using our bishop on d6. Fine, so we have our last example to work on. But before we continue, I wanted to remind you that our workshops are free. So, however, if you enjoy this content, you can support me by send a donation using this link. If you have PayPal, then please use this link. I'm going to show you how it works. So you click this button, a pop-up window appears where you have where you can enter the amount that you want to donate, and then you click this PayPal. So it redirects you to enter your PayPal account, and then you can send money automatically to my PayPal account. The other way to pay to donate is to use Wise through this link. So I would really appreciate any amounts, especially in such an important period of my life when I'm planning to move to another country. Okay. So let's continue. This is our fourth example. By the way, one more announcement. Soon there will be a new course published. It's called a comprehensive chess course for club players from 1400 to 2000. I'm going to tell you more about this course next Sunday on the next workshop, once the course will be released. Okay, fine. So what do we have in this position? Well, Black made already a mistake here. They should continue with e5. Looks like a stupid move because it's just a pawn sacrifice, but this move would allow Black to consolidate their pieces. Like that, and probably they will survive. So bishop h7 fails this time because after knight h7 the queen is hanging too. So Black could potentially hold the position. Of course, Black is worse. They don't have a pawn, but it's not completely losing. However, they played h6 to prevent bishop g5, bishop takes f6, and queen h7 checkmate. So they played h6. What's your opinion? How to manage it? Okay, so a sacrifice of the bishop on h6, Mark, but you have to clearly visualize that you have sufficient material to win. Or, you maybe just want to take the bishop on c5. Oh, that's the point. No, you cannot. You don't have time to take it. They're gonna play bishop somewhere or e5 with the pawn. So yeah, bishop h6 was played in the game. Well, you could, for example, start with rook d1 and then play bishop h6, but bishop h6, oops, this bishop, seems like a very natural move. And why? In this position, this is a natural move because of your material. You can bring a lot of pieces to the attack. Okay, bishop f4. What's the purpose of bishop f4? To bring more material? Well, rook d1, queen e7, then like that. And then if this move, you don't take it. Okay, I don't know. I think it's still playable after king h1, but it seems to me that you'd better avoid these complications. So that's why let's take on h6 first. So this is the threat. And that's why some actions are required. Well, a6, at least you can get 2 extra pawns. Well, also knight g5 is a problem. And that's why in this position, Black decided to sacrifice one more pawn with this move. What if they just retreated with the bishop to e7? Let's decide. How to play them. So there is knight g5 idea with bishop h7, but let's decide whether you're winning after bishop h7 or not. Because bishop h7, king h8, bishop g6, king g8, what? I would say that knight g5, knight h7 is better than what you suggest. Because you create a threat. And taking on h7 means checkmate. even if the rook is on e8. So bishop takes. Well, it's over. I'll show you. Yeah, so in that queen d5 variation, the knight falls. Okay, so knight g5. Yes, I think. Well, actually, I'm debating which move to play. Rook a d1 or knight g5 right away. Let's try it right away. Because if you play rook a d1, the queen, let's say, goes to c7, then knight g5, and they can try this move. Ah, then you win the queen, right? So this move, king goes there, and knight f7. Okay, so but let's talk about knight g5 first. So bishop h7 is not a threat, knight h7 is a threat. Okay, let's say, well, what do they play? Bishop d7, for example. Well, I would say that we should do a rook lift, but okay, let's talk about this move. So this is a threat. Capturing means mate. Knight g4 also doesn't look attractive because knight g4, then this move. Two pieces are hanging. Yeah, I don't think it looks promising. So f6. Check. Here. Take. Maybe it's okay actually for black. Okay, so... Okay, let's go back. Where was it? Queen h6, bishop e7, knight g5, bishop d7, knight h7. Okay, so no, I don't think knight h7 is a good move neither. So rook e1, the a rook, then rook lift would work. So I would even say that in this position we'd better start with a rook lift. Anyway, the game continued with e5, where they wanted to stop it with e4. Knight g5, it stops e4. And they played queen e7. What if they, for example, did bishop e6 move? How would you win? Because bishop e6, kind of a move that cements, that protects f7. Okay, so knight g5, f4, rook f3. Well, I think it's related to the previous scenario. But why do you need f4 if you can instead play rook e1 and then rook e3? So maybe the f pawn becomes helpful. Huh? What? Bishop h7, king h8. In this physics position, bishop g6. Wait. Let's say you do a check, king h8, and then you play bishop g6, king g8. Okay, your turn. I played bishop h7, bishop g6 in order to win a temper, but what do you achieve? I can make these moves on the board. So bishop h7, king h8, and then bishop g6, king goes there. So it's even extra tempo. I still think it's winning, but, well, why bishop g6? Yes, but I played bishop e6 to protect it, but it was already protected by the rook, so how does it work? Even if there was no bishop still capturing there, then queen g6, but rook g7. But this time, with the bishop on e6, they definitely take with the bishop. Well, you are actually still winning with rook d1, rook d3, but The idea of this check on h7 is to relocate the bishop to open the file so that rook d1 becomes a tempo move and the bishop is not hanging. So that's why e4 is a safer place than g6. It also stops the pawn move. And if it's taken, then queen h7 is immediate checkmate. So queen moves and then rook d3, and this is a quick mate. So rook g3, for example. Okay, well, knight g5, queen e7 was played in the game, and simply a rook lift decides the game. Here, even it's not required, but you can do rook lift through e4, because if knight takes, queen e7 is immediate checkmate. They played rook d8. And what do you think? What is the white's winning scenario? They executed a tactical combination here, and because of that tactical combination, they won the game. Okay, so rook a3 actually may work too. Rook a3, bishop takes, pawn takes, and this rook becomes open, so the knight is hanging. Yes, it works. Well, if they take, it works. So rook d6, for example, you take there. No, you don't. If this move, you play this move first. King goes here, then there, then this. And then what? Bishop f7 just. No, I don't see checkmate there. So, okay. Instead of rook a3, do you have a better way to play? It still seems to be winning, but I want you to find a quicker win. Yeah, bishop h7, bishop g6, bishop f7. Yeah, at least this works. So this, king h8, this, and then you win a queen. Yeah, but white played better. They played rook e5 first. And if queen e5, this bishop h7 idea leads to checkmate. So if they take, then there is checkmate on f7. If they play king h8, there is a checkmate on f7 with the bishop this time. That's why the queen is hanging, it's hard to make a move. Well, if the queen moves away, they lose a knight. If the queen goes there, they lose f7 with bishop h7, bishop g6, bishop f7. So that's why it's impossible to make a solid move. They decided to sacrifice, lost their queen, and then resigned. Well, with extra queen, there is nothing to do. Okay, what you may learn from today's workshop. The edge pawn, the advanced edge pawns are the objects of the attack. There are several ways you can exploit it. In this exact game, we analyzed a direct sacrifice, how it works. It may work only in case if you have sufficient material to continue your attack. In this previous game, that was extra pawn, and in order to take it, we created a pin. In this example, the pawns were flexible, and instead of attacking the edge pawn, we had to undermine the pawn on b6 with c5 move. And finally here, there was typical g4, g5 idea. So using your king's pawn cover to undermine the edge passed pawn to be able to create a mating threat on h7. Fine, so we are done for today. Do you have any questions? Okay, if not, then thanks for coming. Tomorrow I'm going to send the recording and I'm going to make a post on chess.com regarding this workshop with all the games uploaded there. See you next Sunday. Bye bye.